Hi there, my name is Jarrett. Welcome back to Damage Algebra. It's been 90 days since my last devlog for Forward Operations, which is my hobbyist game dev project, so it's time for another check-in on my progress. If you want a full explanation of the idea behind Forward Operations, the first devlog goes into great detail, and I've put a card with a link on screen if you're curious. Feel free to pause this video and go check that out. If not, the short version is it's an RTS where you don't just train nameless, faceless soldiers at the barracks, you actually have to care for them. If you want to win on the battlefield, you have to manage their physical and psychological needs first. Base building is about keeping them happy and ready to fight, not just unlocking the next tier of units or upgrades. Alright, so what have I been up to? Well, last time I said this. With that in mind, I think next quarter I will probably experiment with incorporating CrashKonijn's GOAP library into the game, see if I can gain any efficiencies. Unfortunately, that means you will have to wait for the next devlog to see how that went. So, it's the next devlog. How did it go? Overall, the refactor was successful. CrashKonijn's library is fully integrated and my soldiers behave exactly the same with this implementation as they did with my DIY GOAP engine. This was the only thing I worked on for the past 90 days, which probably makes it sound like it was really hard to do. But that's not actually the case, and it leads me to the first thing I want to talk about that's less game dev and more philosophical, so bear with me. I try as hard as I can to adhere to the no 0 days mantra, which means that I avoid having days where I do absolutely no work on my game. Even writing one sentence in my notebook is something that moves the ball forward at least a little bit, and that's better than nothing. In reality, life is messy, and it's important that you balance your passions with your responsibilities and career goals. Or at least I believe it is for me. For example, back in April I took on a new project at work, which was on top of my existing project and my ongoing management and leadership responsibilities, because it was an opportunity to test and prove myself in ways I hadn't been in a while. This ate up a lot of time over the past 3 months, and it brought a lot of stress, but it's been a positive experience overall, and I'm glad that I did it. On top of that, I had a chance to travel and see family that I haven't seen in a long time. And I've also been prioritizing time with friends, and I even restarted a D&D campaign that I run that had been on hiatus for over a year. All of this is to say that none of my time was wasted because I didn't spend every free second writing code. Our priorities are hungry animals, and we feed them with minutes we have while we have them. Be good to yourself. Don't beat yourself up for prioritizing what is right or fair or valuable in the moment. Just so long as you find your way back to your passions, you were never really lost. Okay, that aside, now for the dev portion of this devlog. What was it like incorporating CrashKonijn's GOAP library into Forward Operations in place of my own? Honestly, not terribly difficult. I'm a big believer in decoupling code. I want to create modules and features that are so separate from one another, they don't know other ones exist. When they need to exchange information, they do so through communication interfaces, for which there are several options you can choose from. Of course, building this way comes with some boilerplate, and you could feel at times a little like it's over-engineering, but there's one very particular benefit of doing things this way, and I think pragmatic programmer Dave Thomas says it best.
When faced with 2 or more options, choose the one that makes it easier to change in future. And this is simply a corollary of Dave's rule of design. All right? I say every single design methodology can be encapsulated into one sentence. A good design is easier to change than a bad design.
What this meant for me is that when I ripped out the goal planning engine that I wrote, none of the other systems knew or cared. I didn't get 1,000 errors in the console. Of course, the characters stopped doing things, but that was just because the systems like movement or animation weren't receiving messages to do anything. They weren't broken, they were just idle. I did have to completely rewrite actions, goals, and sensors, but once I wired them up, all the other systems reacted as expected. None of the systems knew the goal planner existed in the first place, so they didn't care when it did exist, they didn't care when it didn't exist anymore, and they didn't care when it did exist again. I'm oversimplifying, of course, it wasn't a completely smooth journey, but 95% of the time that I spent on this refactor was spent writing new goals, new actions, and new sensors that the library would use. Unfortunately, I don't have the time right now to go into too much detail on the decoupling. I'd like to do more of a deep dive on that in the future, but I only left myself about a week to put this video together, and these videos are a lot of work, so I need to move on for now. There are some things I want to note about CrashKonijn's GOAP library now that I've played with it a bit. First, something I found interesting is that the library provides no means of determining which goal your characters should choose. This is an intentional choice, and the documentation makes that clear. This was eye-opening for me, since the system that I built put goal choice and goal planning together into one. I just talked about how important decoupling is, so doesn't it make sense to decouple these things too? I think so. Another interesting thing I've gleaned from CrashKonijn's library is a much better way to pre-build possible paths in the planner by linking which actions and goals are actually related to one another. In contrast, the planner that I built dynamically tried to figure out all the possible paths every time it tried to choose and plan out the next goal, which worked, but it was so much wasted computational effort. Again, by decoupling the choosing from the planning, it's possible to just know what all the plan paths are for each goal and focus on those whenever a goal is actually chosen. I also appreciate the way the library approaches managing the character's movement. Again, there's decoupling happening here, which really is the theme of this video if you haven't noticed. In my planner, movement was baked into every action, which meant the action was responsible for moving the character to a location and then performing that action. In CrashKonijn's library, movement is a separate system with its own life cycle that throws events so that they can be handled as needed. There's more nuance to the system than that, and I'll let you do a full review on the documentation yourself if you're interested. But, suffice to say, I really like this approach. Overall, I've found CrashKonijn's GOAP library to be well thought out and well written. It does what it says it does, and it doesn't try to do any more. I could gripe about minor things, but the takeaway for me is that I would recommend it to someone who wants to jump into building something that uses GOAP and doesn't want to have to build the engine themselves. So now that I've integrated this whole new goal planning library, what's next? Well, I've learned a lot from this integration, and while it's been good, there are some things I'd like to change as it applies to my game specifically. This is natural. CrashKonijn's library is a general use system with a general use interface. I have some targeted needs, however, especially around how I organize my code, how I use mono behaviors and scriptable objects, and how the tick system works independent of calls to update in my game specifically. Because goal planning is so central to what I believe to be the core idea of forward operations, where the player's soldiers feel alive enough that you actually want to care for them, I believe it is worth concentrating on for at least one more cycle. I want to see if I can take the things I've learned and rebuild a basic planning engine that is more decoupled and dovetails nicely with the way the other systems in the game work. Considering it's summertime here, it's very likely this might be what I work on for the rest of the year, but I hope it will go pretty quick. The next devlog will coincide with a full year of development on the game, so I'd like to get this all wrapped up by the end of September if I can. I've already built one goal planning engine, and I've implemented another, so I at least have a decent amount of experience under my belt at this point. And also, if it appears to be going poorly, I can just fall back to CrashKonijn's library and move on. So that's my plan. Give it just one more try to build my own planning engine. At the end of this effort, I'll have an answer, and then I can start building out other systems. I'm excited to get to other things like base building, so I'm hoping this does the trick. Guess you'll have to check back in another 90 days to see how this goes. If you're not already, I'd love to have you as a subscriber here at Damage Algebra, but either way, thank you much for watching and hope to see you next time. Take care.